Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning yerushalmi terumos Perikei Halacha Aleph. This will be the final daf in which we'll have still full daf Halacha Aleph. We're learning today daf Nun. We left off on daf Nun Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amud by the end of the line Amar Rabbi Yosi. And let us quickly review where we're at. First of all, we learned a Tosefta on the Sechtes Chala in Chizkiah explaining the Tosefta, which is telling us that if there's a mixture of tahor flour and tamei flour, and it's properly mixed, so whatever the ratio of the tamei versus the tahor, whatever that ratio is, the presumption is that whatever will be separated for challah has in it that same ratio. So the Mishnah tells us that on one hand, we're not going to separate tamei for challah. On the other hand, as long as we make sure that there isn't enough tamei flour to be able to impart tumah after the tahor flour becomes muksher, which is after you mix water into it, and that is that there is never going to be an egg or more of tamei flour, as long as you have those conditions, separate a separation. Even though in it there's going to be tamei flour, all you need to do is to verbalize that the tamei flour in it, which is now tamei dough, is not challah, remains chulin tameim. I am only separating the tahor flour in it as challah, and that's a perfect separation. Came along Chizkiah, and he gave you a scenario in which you are not making sure that none of this mixture will become tamei. Chizkiah says you don't need to do that. You only have to make sure that the separation of challah remains tahor. And that will be in a case, and these are the numbers, where you have a total of 4 kav of flour, a total. 4 kav of flour. Let's speak about egg volumes, which is what counts when it comes to the concern of the tamei not imparting. You have 96 egg volumes of flour in total. 1/6 of it is tamei, and that means 16 egg volumes are tamei. Now, another din, that to separate challah, not nowadays when anyways it's tameis and we burn it anyways, so there's no shear nowadays. But whenever you separated challah to actually give it to a kohen, the rule is that a commoner, not a nachtoim, a balabas, separates 1 from 24. A 24th of 96 is 4 eggs. So Chizkiah gave you a beautiful cheshbon. In the scenario that we mentioned, mixture, 80 tahor, 16 tamei, separate 5 eggs. When you separate 5 eggs, since 1/6 of what you have is tamei, 1/6 of 5 is less than 1. So you don't have a full egg volume of tamei. On the other hand, you have 4, be'em is 4 and a bit, of tahor flour. 4 is what's needed for you to have a proper challah separation for all of the 96. And that's the way you're going to be able to fulfill that Tosefta. Rabbi Yochanan apparently argues with Chizkiah based on our current understanding that Rabbi Yochanan demands for you to see to it that none of the mixture becomes tamei, based on the presumption that we had up until the end of last year on top of Daf Nun, that since the Arab, there's a machlokes tanoim, whether one is allowed to separate tahor challah for tamei dough. Machlokes tanoim, Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says yes, nitelas min hatoher al hatamei, parenthetically making challah different than truma. But the chachamim hold that you're not allowed to. So we began up until today's year with the presumption that the chachamim, that Rabbi Yochanan follows the chachamim. Therefore, he must see to it that none of the dough will become tamei. If not, you can't separate the tahor on the tamei. But if that will be the case, Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the Tosefta in challah is that we're not talking about 4 kav, a total of 96 eggs. Can be, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're going to have to divide the mixture when you have 16 tamei egg volumes into 17 doughs to see to it that every dough has in it less than an egg. Problem is, if you have to make that division on all of the mixture, you're only chayiv to separate challah when you have the total of 43.2 egg volume. So in order for you to be able to have 17 such doughs, Rabbi Yochanan understands that the Tosefta in Chala is speaking about a case where you have more than 5 sa of flour. Or to give you an exact number, you have 734.4 egg volumes of flour, which is an amount that if you divide it by 17, each one will have 43.2. Also, in the 734.4, you only have 16 egg volumes, Tommy. When you divide it into 17, based on the presumption that it's all mixed proportionally, each one will have less than an egg. That's the way Rabbi Yochanan understood the Masechta, the Tosefta and Chala. That is where we're up to. What we're going to learn today is a few very important points. Number one, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't necessarily have to argue with Chizkiah. We're actually going to say that they don't argue. Everyone will agree with the Tana, Rabbi Eliezer, that niteles min hatohod al hatameh. That's number one. We're going to see another very important, and we're going to work it out. Another very big thing that we're going to learn today is that the din, that when you separate challah, not a baker, an average person, the ratio is 1 in 24. That's only if you're separating challah from tahor flour. When you're separating challah from tamei flour, I know that nowadays we don't care about the shir. But then in the times of the Gemara, you have to separate 1 of 48. These numbers will be extremely important.
Is that for the professional case?
No, like the professional. But even a balabas, 1 of 48. This what I just mentioned will be a foundation to today's daf. After we go through all of these numbers, we're going to go back to Chizkiah's statement on our Mishnah. The case of the Mishnah is, again, you had 1 sa'ah of tamei truma, 1 sa'ah of truma tameya, that fell into 100 sa'in of chulin tohirin. Even though you have the ratio to be mevatel the truma, Chizkiah's chiddush is that the truma is not going to be nullified. Truma is batel. Tuma is not batel, and the Gemara is going to challenge Chizkiah from a rule. I'll just say the words now in the introduction. The rule of nevela betela b'shchuta. We're going to go into the basic laws of taroivis that many people here who learn smicha learned it. When there's no mixture of tam, just a mixture of a chaticha of nevela into 2 chatichas of shchuta. And over there, aside of the issue of nevela, not allowed to eat, shchuta, you could eat, don't forget that there's also tuma and tara. Nevela is metame, shchuta is not metame. And it's going to appear that when we learn about the din of nevela, betela, b'shchuta, not only is the nevela batal, but tuma is also batal. That will be apparently a problem against Chizkiah, because Chizkiah is arguing that even when truma is batal, tuma is not batal. And that's going to lead us finally to something very foundational. Guys, the words. Bitul l'kula alma works min b'she'enoi minoi. Let me say this in English. Like kinds versus unlike kinds. If the 2 items are different, there's a greater chance for the bigger one nullifying the smaller one. When the 2 types are like, min b'minoi, I'll give examples when we learn the Gemara. For sure, the Tana Rebbe Yehuda holds that min b'minoi is b'chlal not batal. Now, how do you define min b'minoi? That will be the one big thing that we're going to learn. We're going to review today. Really, we learned this many times together. So obviously, if 2 things are physically not like, min b'she'ena minoi, right? Apples and oranges. Min b'she'ena, unlike. What happens if 2 items are like? They're physically alike, but they are halachically not like. Halachically, they are different. Like, for example, one is tahor, one is tamei. Like, for example, one is kosher, one is treif. Meat, chicken, are they considered like or unlike? So here's the rule. If one of the 2, either the majority or the minority, if one of the 2, either the majority or the minority, could at some point be halachically like the other, since they are physically alike, and even halachically, now they're not alike. One is kosher, one is treif. But if one of them could become like the other, so then they're considered like. They're like begashmias, they're like potentially beruchnias. This everyone agrees to. The machlokes that we have in the Bavli between Rab Chizda and Rab Chanina is, which one do we want which one are we looking at to see if it potentially will become like the other? Is it the majority becoming like the minority, or is it the minority becoming like the majority? That will be something that we're going to review when we're going to learn today's daf. These are big topics in Bittul, and without any further ado, let's dive inside. So we are on daf nun, at the end of the second line from the top of the Amid. The presumption until now, we just left off by saying that Rabbi Yechanan, who's saying that the Tosefta in Challah is only speaking about the case where you have a total of 5 saw of flour, 734.4, in order for you to be able to divide it into 17, was based on the presumption that Rabbi Yechanan is insisting for you to divide it into 17, because every group will have to have challah removed from it, every little of these doughs relatively. Why is that? Because he holds, like the Chachamim, that you're not allowed to take challah min hatoed alatame. And Chizkiya's explanation, that you only began with 96 eggs total, and you removed, we said, 5 eggs, and that became challah for everything. Problem is, in these 5 eggs, you have less than one of the 16 eggs, which means in the remainder, you have 15 eggs. So when you put water to the remainder, make it into dough, I know none of it is challah, but all of it is tamei. Doesn't matter, because that's what we were saying, that Chizkiya holds like the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, that challah nitelas min hatoed ala tamei, but Rabbi Yechanan argues with that. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosi le Rabbi Yirmiyah loy mistabra. Why are you insisting that? I will tell you that even Rabbi Yechanan is moidem to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, that you are allowed to take challah min hatoed ala tamei. Nevertheless, man do Amar Chizkiya, Chizkiya gave a scenario, lisha avar, and the Yerushalmi means b'diavad. B'diavad means that if you have a case where you only have the 96 eggs total, 16 of them is tamei, in which in that case you cannot separate them into 17 groups, because then none of them will have to have challah removed from it, because none of them will have the 43.2. In such a case, we follow Rabbi Eliezer. But man, the Amar Rabbi Yechanan, when Rabbi Yechanan touched the scenario of the Tosefta in Masechtas Challah to be speaking about a case where you have the 734.4, it's even better. He's speaking about a case where you have that amount. When you have that amount, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that you are allowed to take challah min hatoed ala tamei, will be moida, everyone will be moida. That it's better if you could to separate the dough in such a way where not a single dough will become tamei. And that's a din of lechatchila. And not only that, not only did Rabbi Yosi say that to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amalei, Rabbi Yirmiyah responded, you know what? Ufna savar kein, I agree with you. Now, what is the case of the B'di'evet? What is the case of the B'di'evet? The Ezihi Guma al Date de Rabbi Yechanan. Okay? In other words, now that we said that even according to Rabbi Yechanan is moide to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, that you are allowed to separate B'di'evet min hatoed ala tamei. So now, in the case of Rabbi Yechanan, when you have the 734.4, how much of it can you knead into a separate dough, which was then that indentation that they had in the bowls. They had bowls, and in the bowls there was an indentation that separated what was in the gummer from everything else. What would be the amount? So let the guys halk up. You have a total of 734. How much challah do you have to remove from 734? A fourth. So Rabbi Yosi, Berabun, B'Shem Rabbi Yoino, Tiftar, first thing you have to do is Shegibel Achas Bishva Esrei, that you needed 1/17 of the total. Why do you have to have 1/17? Because if you have any separation that is bigger than a 17th, bigger would mean 16th, then you're going to have 1 egg tamei in it. In other words, in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, where you have 734.4 total of flour, in it there's 16 eggs. Everyone is going that in the mixture you have 16 egg volume of tamei flour. Now that we said that even according to Rabbi Yochanan, b'di'evid, you can only have one dough separated from the big remaining, and that dough will remain tahor. What size will that dough have to be? Well, first of all, you can't separate a 16th, you can't separate a 15th, you have to go to a 17th. Like we mentioned, a 17th of 734.4 is 43.2. But hold on a second. When you have that amount, here's my issue. You only and you're designating it challah for everything else, right, Aviv? You only have to give how much percent challah for everything else? 1 in 24. Here you have 1 in 17. Right away. If you separated the 17th, but you only have to give challah 1 in 24, so you're going to be having in what you separated more challah that you need for the remaining. Right, the case of Chizkiah was perfect. You had 96 total. In it 16. When you separate 5 eggs, we said, almost 1 egg is tummy. And you're saying that is not a challah. You're getting 4 eggs. 4 eggs is a 24th of 96. Oh, it's Chizkiah gave you a case where everything worked. Now that we're saying that Rabbi Yochanan be'emes is moide to Rabbi Eliezer b'di'evet, to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yochanan agrees to Chizkiah, which is that it's not that you have to separate it into 17. Now, if you separate your 734.4 into 17, each one is 43.2. From each one, you would only separate, according to that, 1/24th of it, minus the tummy. But that's not what the Gemara is not asking in that case. Each one would have challah removed from it. But now that you're saying that b'di'evid, Rabbi Yochanan is moida, that you don't have to make it into 17, b'di'evid. You have to only make one that's vaday tahor. How big does that one have to be? It can't be less than a 17th, but it can be a 17th.
Okay, so
now, 1 second. And now you're saying that it becomes challah for the remainder. Right. That doesn't work. Why doesn't it work just the numbers wise? Because you have to remove from 734.4, you know how much challah you have to remove? A 24th vlad. This...
Okay, but the 17th is more.
17th is more, that's a problem. So you have too much challah. So what do you do now? If a person didn't want to make 17 different separations, they didn't want to make 17 doughs. We're saying that even according to Rabbi Yochanan, in his case, you can only separate 1 for everything else. But that 1 will have to be a 17th. Can't be smaller than a 17th. You can't separate a 24th from the remaining because you won't have the 43.2. So you have to separate a 17th. We're just asking like a technical question. So now that you have this separation, I get it. In it, you don't have an egg. In it, you don't have an egg because there were only 16 eggs. It's a 17th. But you almost all of it is tahor. But you have too much challah. So you know what you would do? The problem is that you don't want to give more than you have to. You're separating challah. The 17th is not only enough for the remaining. It's more. So he says, tiftar, you took off the minimum amount needed, which is a 17th. We already explained that. But now, you know what you get to do? You get to add 2 additional saw to the remainder. Here's Vlad. You add 2 additional saw to the remainder. In other words, you make the other one more, and now you got yourself the perfect ratio. Now let me make the numbers and see that this is not so pashut. If you look in your Gemara, you'll see, look at the Marafulda and the Pnei Moshe, they're huge because of what I will say right now by heart. Okay. The first step we already was the easiest one. Right, as long as you don't have more than a 17th, you have a 17th. 17th, you have the 43.2. You don't have an egg that's tamei, you're good. Now, I just want to tell you like this. If you want to know how much Aviv will this be good for, very good. Take 43.2, Thank you, Vlad. Times 24. I want you to remember this number. You get the number of 1,036.8. So this 17th, Vlad, I know I didn't minus the tummy. We're going to get to the minus in a moment. We're going to get to that. But let's go general. This that you separated should, let's say, should resolve chala, if you can use that word, on 1,034. Here we're saying you only have a total of 734. So the Gemara says, okay, add 2 more saw. How much is these saw? We learned this 2 days ago. 1 saw is 144 eggs. 1 saw is 144. 2 saw is 288. Now I want to tell you something. Take 734.4, add 288. How much do you have? You have 1,022.4. So the Gemara is saying, okay, make now a total of 1,022.4, and else is good. Question is, how is that good? Okay, you are removing the 17th. The 17th, we just said, should have resolved 1,036. The Gemara is giving you, I know that. You have more challah than needed. So what should you do? Add more flour. That's unchallah. And now you'll be matayered everything. You'll resolve challah and everything. But the Gemara didn't give you the right number. L'chayda, we should have got to the number 1,036. Here we're coming to the number only 1,022. That's the kasha. So the answer is a couple of things, a couple of steps. Step number 1 is, when you have 43.2 aviv, is all of it tahar? No, it's not. No, it's not. Because you have in it almost an egg of tamei flour. That egg is not being designated for challah. How much is it? It's 0.94. Let's give you the numbers. So first of all, be'emes, you're not starting with 43.2 flour that's becoming challah. You're starting with 42.26. But we're still not good. We're still not good. Why are we still not good? Because 42, if you would have a calculator, 42.26 is still going to give you a bigger number than the 2 saw, than 1,022. So you got to know another din, and that's the ikar over here. In the remaining aviv, in the 734, not all of it is tar. You have now 16.06 of tamei flour. That also has to have challah removed from it. But like we spoke out in our words of introduction, that from tamei flour that you're making into dough, the quantity of challah that has to be removed is 148. So let me tell you what's really happening over here. From the total that we said, you remove the 16.6. You know what you're going to have? Let me tell you what you're going to have. 1/24 has to be separated for 1,006.4. From the 1,022.2 tahar flour from it, not all of it is tar. We added 2 saw, but you began with 16 plus a little bit of tamei egg, tamei flour. When you remove that, what you really only have over here is 1,006 tahar flour. Now, for the 16 eggs plus a point, plus 0 something, for the 16 eggs of tamei flour, you have to remove 1/48. What's 1/48 of 16? 0.33. This is amazing. So let me tell you what's happening over here. 41.93 times 24 is 1,006. 0.33 times 48 is 15.84. 1,066 plus 1584 is 122 point something. Exactly what the Gemara gives. Well, you don't have to know the whole math over here, but the concept is moedidik. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Rabbi Yechanan agrees with Chizkiah that what? B'di'evet. When you have an issue of tamei and tarred flour, b'di'evet, just make sure that the challah part doesn't become tamei. Everything else, even if it became tamei, it's a beseder. And the tar is challah for everything, for it and for everything. In the case of Rabbi Yochanan, where you began with 734.4 eggs total, in it you had 16 tamei eggs. What does Rabbi Yochanan hold b'di'evid? Like Chizkiah, you only have to take one little dough and make sure it's tar. So the beginning was easy. Yeah, if you have 16 eggs that are tamei, take a 17th. But the 17th is more than the 124th. Fine, add 2 sa. Problem is, when you add 2 sa, you would have thought, if you begin 43.2 times 24 is 1,036. The Gemara is saying only add 288. The Gemara is saying the most this challah can be metahed is 1,022. And why not 1,036? So we went through these couple of steps. First of all, the tamei flour in your little dough doesn't count. You don't have 43.2. That's the most important thing that we have to know. You only have 42.26. Only that will become challah. The other thing you have to know is that for the remaining, for those 16 tamei eggs, flour volume of eggs, for that you don't need a 24th, you only need a 48th. And if you put all of that together, b'diyuk, that if you are separated the 17th, you have more challah that's needed for the 734, but all you can add is only 288. You cannot add more. Once you added 288, this 17th separation, which is not all of it challah, because the 0.94 tamei is remaining chul and tameim, the tahor challah in it is going to be mater, the total of a 10 of 1,022.
But it's not consistent math.
It's gewaldige math.
It's gewaldige, but it's not consistent. You take 124 off the main portion and then up.
1/17 of the main portion.
Okay, but then you only take 148?
No. You take a 17th, not to have the egg issue. You add to the remaining now 2 sa of flour, even though, by the way, what this flour that you're adding will become tamei. We're saying b'di'evid, we don't care if it becomes tamei. Maybe you have already tamei flour. Doesn't matter. In other words, we're not caring now about that the big one is going to become tamei. We don't care. Because b'di'evid, you can take challah min hatoyer ala tamei. All we care is for the challah to be taught. The numbers will be 10, 22, and we'll stop with that. Yes?
Shouldn't the tamei part in the 43.2, shouldn't that be part that's like being taken challah for? Shouldn't that be part of like the...
We added that. It goes into these numbers.
Oh, so was... Oh, so
In other words, whatever is not becoming challah has to be challad by the tahor.
Oh, so
100%. The whole thing works, and it's a mamish exact. It's just amazing that in the Yerushalmi they don't even talk it through. They just said at 2 sa. I think the most important detail is not the math. The math for them was easy. The math for everyone is easy when you do the work. The halachim that the tamei needs 1/48. Only the tar needs a 1/24. Once you got that in there, and then you make everything proportional, it's exactly you're at 2 sa, and the 17th will be what's needed. Okay. The second part of today's daf, which is, I know it looks little, it's not that little. This is so foundational. And now we're going to go into greater examples. Truth be told, and we learned at Rambam, we're not following the way we paskin. Our sugya is trying to make everything fit l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana that says, min b'minoi is not batul. He has a great source. He has a source that on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would mix the bloods of the bull together with the bloods of the goat, there was so much more bull blood than goat. We're speaking about midoraisa. Bittul is just majority. Just majority. Many times majority. Even when they are mixed together, they are still called dam hapod and dam asor. Just to begin with that. In other words, there's a rule that Rabbi Yehuda has that min b'minoi is not batal. Number 2, we're trying to make it work like Rabbi Yehuda. I want to just use the English. We're going to use like, unlike. When two things are unlike physical, that's clear min b'she'ein aminoi. And what is the rule of min b'she'ein aminoi? Another thing just to remember, even though normally say you need to have 60, you're right but you're wrong. You need to have 60 if there is an imparting of tam, which happens when you cook them together, when you salt them together, when they soak together, kavush k'mavushal. But if everything is self-contained, so the example we will give today is you have packaged a piece of meat that's nevela, and you have identical meats that are packaged. That means that when they are, even if they're touching each other, there is no imparting of flavor. They're in the freezer. They don't have to be in there. I'm just being magazin. There, even midrabanan, all you need is to have roiv. So there's a rule that the minority is batal in the majority. So in the case of shchuta nevela, shchuta is meat that I'm allowed to eat because you shechted the animal. Nevela is an animal that died without shchita. So then, I'm not allowed to eat that animal. If you have two shchuta and one nevela, the rule is, even though we don't eat them all together, I'm not going into the Ramah, I'm going to the basic halacha, it's nullified. B'zeh achar zeh, you can eat it. Mamish.
So you could eat the nevela.
Well, you can't say you can eat the nevela, you can say that the nevela becomes nullified when I take one and I ask Aviv, what is this? Is this shchuta or nevela? So the halacha says, well, what was the majority? The majority was shchuta. So this one is shchuta. Whenever you take one at a time, you paskin, this one is shchuta. I got a problem with that. Let me tell you the problem with that. That aside of the dinim of kosher, not kosher, there is another din, which is that meat, b'sar nevela, is tamei, and it imparts tuma. B'sar shchuta is not tamei. When we learn about the dinim that the nevela becomes batal, we are also going to be saying that it will not be metame. Okay, it's batal. Every one we say it's shchuta. What's the problem with that? Problem is chizkiah. When we learned in our Mishnah that you had one sof truma tameya, it fell into 100 soin of chulin tohayrin. Okay, so that was clear. The truma was batal. The owner, the non-kohen, after he gives one, any one, to the kohen, he can eat the rest. Why? Because the truma is nullified. But what about the dinim of tuma and tara? So Chizkiah says, the tuma is not batal. That's how we began this whole conversation. So now, when you have the 100 sof chulin, said Chizkiah, you see to it that when you remove challah, you make sure that the challah doesn't have in it, right, the egg. Why was he worried about it? Because he was on the premise that bittul goes for the din of truma. But tuma is not batal. Apparently, Frek the Gemara, Rabba Bar Mamel asked, the leis hadad doesn't Chizkiyah's chiddush that tuma is not nullified. Imagine, guys, here we're speaking about a ratio of 100, still not nullified. Doesn't that seem to be in argument with Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, and it's a little bit nuanced. Nevela b'teila b'shchuta. The case that I gave is the case that we're talking about. You have a total of 3 pieces. 2 of them is shchuta, only one is nevela. So number 1 is, you are allowed to consume them because it's batal in a simple majority because there's no imparting of flavor. But now Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is also addressing tuma. Now I want to tell you the following, that nevela can impart tuma by contact. Nevela could impart tuma by what's called hesed, which is part of masa. So says Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina, number 1 is, not only are you allowed to eat it, but even when it comes to the dinim of tuma, batal magah. Batal magah means that if something pure touches one of these 3 pieces, you know what we say? That remains tar, because touched chuta. If another one touched another of those 3 pieces, you know what we're going to say? That's tar, because it touched the shchuta. If something else touched the 3rd piece, you know what we're going to say? Tar. Because we're going to say, we're only looking at one at a time, and we're batal b'roif. However, v'heseita le batal. Heseita means that if something was in contact with all 3 at the same time, In other words, if something moved all three pieces, you see, just like I mentioned, even when it's bottle, you can't eat all three at the same time. If it moved all three at the same time, so then it's not going to be bottle. But that's because all three. But if you do each one separately, he's saying that it's bottle. So first of all, you see it's a kasha against Chizkiah. He's clearly saying that the dinim of bittul don't only resolve isser v'heter eating, like by truma, can a zar eat or not? No, it's also going to be mevatel tuma. So you already got the problem. First of all, okay, so they can be arguing, but that's the Gemara's question. Is Chizkiah arguing with Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina? But before we go on, yes.
Didn't we say they're packaged? Or it's not?
They're packaged, yes. I stand with my example, so
if it's packaged, why would the tuma touch, why would it convey to the other pieces of meat?
Okay, I got it. Oh, it's unpackaged. It's just frozen. There's no imparting of flavor.
Okay.
Hesed is where it's going to be packaged. Now, one second. Now, what we're adding right now is to explain that this din is even according to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, min b'mino is not bottle. Now, these meats, physically, you would say they're alike. Why are we classifying this a case of min? Why is it bottle? Because we're saying, it's min b'she'enoi minoi. How is it min b'she'enoi minoi? Well, I'll tell you why. Because halachically, it's min b'she'enoi minoi. It's not so simple. It's not so simple. Why is it not so simple? Currently, one is kosher, one is treif. Aber lefi shei efsher lish. What's the majority here? The shchuta. According to our Gemara, the only way this will become min b'minoi is if the majority could become halachically like the minority. If they are physically alike. What would it mean that the majority would become like the minority? Aviv, basar that was shechted, will it ever have an inherent tuma of nevela? Never. I want to tell you that the other way around doesn't work what I'm saying. A basar that's nevela, which means right now it's inherently tamei. At some point, when it becomes completely inedible, it loses its status of B'sar Nevela, and it loses its Tuma. The minority component, not now, at some point, halachically, won't be Asur B'achila, it won't be Tameh, it won't be food, but it will halachically be like the Basar Shchuta. This is subject to a machlokes in the Bavli between Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina. This is very important. So what the Gemara is quoting from Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, that first of all he's saying it's bottle. Not only is it bottle in the Isser V'Heter of eating, he's saying that Tuma is bottle, which is a problem with Chizkiah. But then he wants to add something else. You can argue that l'chayr it's min b'minoi. Why is it min b'minoi? Because they're physically alike. It's min b'she'enoi minoi. What defines it min b'she'enoi minoi? Because it's halachically unlike. That in itself is not enough. What we need is to make sure that even in the future, the majority, this is the iked, the roiv will never become halachically like the miut, which it won't. Because here we're going in the tzad of heter. One aveil and two shchuta. And these are the words. Lefi she'i efsher l'shchuta dafta dafnun aleph sheteyasen aveilam. This is foundational. And this is the shita of Rav Chizda. Okay, this is good. According to Rabbi Chanina, this statement will never be said. Because according to Rabbi Chanina, when two things are physically like, you're saying it's min b'she'enoi minoi because it's halachically unlike. Only currently. According to Rab Chanina, if the minority could become, in the future, like the majority, which is the case, the nevela could become halachically like shchuta, which means, Aviv, it won't be matame. When will that happen? When it becomes spoiled. When it's no longer oichel. It's only in nevela tame because it's food. If it becomes a putrid, then it's not going to be matame. Which means that in the future, the nevela becomes like the shchuta. According to Rab Chanina, this is min b'minoi. Min b'minoi is Rabbi Yehuda is not batel. But Rabbi Yossi but Rab Chanina follows Rab Chizda. This is min b'she'eino minoi, because we're not looking for the minority to become like the majority. We want to see if in the future the majority can become like the minority. Shchuta will never become nevela. Why will it become nevela? By the way, basa shchuta could become tamei if it acquires tuma, but it never becomes inherently tamei. So bottom line is, do we say that Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina and Chizkiah are at odds? This is moededik Amar Rabbi Yossi. I will tell you they're not at odds. Taman over there, we're going to go with the E. E efsher l'shchuta shetiyasa nevela. But amhache, exactly. We're following the shchuta cannot become nevela. Halachically, it will never become nevela. But here, what are we talking about in the case of Chizkiah? We're talking about flour that's tamei. Forget about the truma part. One saw a flour that's tamei that got mixed into 100 soin of flour that's tahar. Gavaldik. What's the majority over here, Aviv? The flour that's tahar. Can flour that's tahar become tamei? Yes, it could. How do you think the flour of truma became tamei? It's not nevela, it's not inherently tamei. It acquired truma. However it happened. Exactly. It substantiates. Now that we are following the shita of Rab Chizda, Chizkiah, and Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina are of the same opinion. Why is Chizkiah saying that the tuma is not batul? Because it's min b'minoi. Tamei and tar. That's the whole point. Physically, they are like flour. What separates them? One is tamei, one is tar. So what? The tamei will not become tar. You can argue. First of all, it can also become if it's no longer oichel. But we're looking at will the majority become like the minority? Yes, it could. So Sai, they are physically alike. Sai over here, Bram Hachen. Now the words are difficult because the way we're learning pshat, the way everyone is learning pshat, it's about the chulin, it's about the tahar becoming tamei. The words of the Gemara is efsher l'chulin le'yaseis truma. That's not accurate because actually it's not about the chulin. By the way, chulin can become truma. We know that chulin meaning tevel, and this is chulin. It means that the status of the majority, the chulin are tohoiden. What we're focusing on chulin, it means the tara. The flour, the 100 saw of chulin tohoiden could become. It's like ki truma. It can become tamei like the truma. And therefore, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina are saying the same thing. This is fantastic. And Amar Rab Chizkiah, I want you to know that I have a different version of this. The version until just the memories. It's not that Abba Bar Mamul is the one that asked. No, that this challenge from Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina against Chizkiah, who brought this up? Rab Simin Kashiyasei. And the Rabba Bar Mamul is the one that resolved it by Adarabba, by using the Shitas Rab Chizda, by using the words of Shlefi, that Shchuta, right, can never become Nevela. Oh, you're following Rab Chizda, that's why it's not batul. So actually everyone is of the same opinion. We'll stop over here to be continued. Guys, you know who's joining us tomorrow? Rav Baruch, the Dr. Baruch is joining back tomorrow.
Amazing.
Yes.
The guy from Midwest?
Yeah, the guy from